Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that rage is all the rage in Rise of Kingdoms right now. Well, in this video, I'm going to break down all these recent insights we've gotten and give you a few more insights so that you can use that to take advantage and dominate your opponents on the battlefield. So stick around. What's up everybody, Psych out here with another Rise of Kingdoms video. Look, if you've been paying attention to what content creators have been putting out for the last few days, you will know that everybody is talking about rage, largely thanks to some discoveries made by John Wick and his collaborators. I'm going to put links down below. You can check out those to his videos talking about rage. I think they're really useful, really instructive. There's so much information packed in them that they really deserve to be watched more than once to really understand them. But what I'm going to do in this video is a couple things. First, I'm going to summarize some of his key findings, and then I'm going to take those key findings and build on those to show you some new insights that maybe Wick and his crew already know. I don't know if they know them or not, but to give you a little bit deeper understanding of what's going on with rage and how you can actually use that to perhaps use some commanders who might be considered a little underrated to do some damage to your enemies on the battlefield. So let's look at three really important discoveries that John Wick and his crew have shown us. So the first one is there's something called base rage. So on every single turn on your attacks and your counterattacks, you gain rage. And that rage gain seems to be tied to both attack and counterattack. That is, you gain some amount of rage per attack, you gain some amount of rage per counterattack. And it's not all tied into one, and that's going to be really important, as I'll show a little later on in this video. The thing that we know about the base rage that John Wick has discovered is it seems to be about 86 is the base rage per attack and 16 per counterattack. So when you do an attack, you gain 86 rage. When you do a counterattack, you gain another 16. Now, that being said, there is also some rage compensation factor, and we've sort of known about this for a while, that the march that's losing seems to gain rage a little bit faster. What John Wick and his crew have done is shown us that it's 10 points if you lose on the counterattack, on the attack side, and 10 points if you lose on the counterattack side. So on a single turn, if you're losing both the attack and the counterattack, you will gain an extra 20 rage. So that's called what he calls rage compensation. So you have base rage at 86 and 16 for your attack and counterattack, and then you have the possibility of gaining 10 compensation on the attack if you're losing, and 10 compensation on the counterattack if you're losing. And we're going to have a lot more on that at the end of this video. The second insight that John Wick has given us, and again, John Wick and crew, is that there is a rage cap. And this was a mind-blowing insight, guys. A rage cap of 220 per turn. This means that no matter what talent you have going, and I have Constantine up here for a reason. He's going to be a commander I'm going to talk about in this video. No matter what, if you have things like Rejuvenate going, which add 150 rage. Look, I just told you that the base rage per turn is about 112 or 130-ish, somewhere in that range, depending on what kind of talent you have. If you have talents like Burning Blood going, if you have talents like Undying Fury, which a lot of people have on Constantine, if you add that to 150, you are going way over that 220 rage cap. So what happens when you go over that rage cap? Well, as the theory goes, or as we think it goes, you get reduced back to that 220. So if you gained 270 rage per turn, you will get reduced back to only 220 rage. This kind of makes sense if you think about it. Otherwise, you might have, with so many rage things going on with Horn of Fury, with Joan of Arc, with Trajan, with William, there's so many ways to buff rage, and some of those don't stack anyway because they're active skills. But with so many ways to boost rage going on, Karak War Drums, you might be worried, and I would be worried if I was the developer of Rise of Kingdoms, that somehow they might actually break the game. It might not actually work. What happens if a skill cycles start to overlap, or somebody gains 1,000 rage on every turn? Do they do a skill every turn? I would start to get worried about those things happening, or people trying to break the game in a way. So this cap kind of prevents the game from breaking itself. I think that's maybe one reason that the cap exists. So but this still has major implications for how these commanders are used and how these what talents you might pick. John Wick has talked a lot about the talent that we see on Guan Yu over here. He's talked a lot about this talent, Feral Nature, saying that he doesn't think it's very valuable because it gives you 100 rage. And if you're already getting, for example, 60 rage from Rejuvenate, you're already getting rage from Burning Blood, you're getting the base rage that we talked about, you're going to be getting rage from other marches on the field, whether it's a Joan of Arc or a Trajan or something like that. The point there is that rage might be wasted. Now, for a long time, people have talked about over-raging, and I've always thought, well, it was kind of a silly conversation to talk about over-raging. If you're worried about, 1,000 rage, if 1,000 rage is the requirement to proc your active skill, over-raging would be things like, okay, well, you only needed 50 rage, but you gained 200 rage that turn, so you really wasted 150 rage. That's what over-raging, the talk, was all about for a long time. But now it's really different. If you're wasting that rage at the end of a skill cycle, I never really worried that much about that because there's so much going on and so many factors that you can't control. But if we're talking about over-raging on a single turn, going more than 220 rage, that rage is really wasted, and it's wasted, could be wasted multiple times, many times throughout a battle, in ways that you can control. And so over-raging is a real issue now that we know there is a rage cap of 220. So that's a pretty important thing to know there. The third thing that we've learned from John Wick and his crew is that rage reduction effects are added last. It's no coincidence that on his videos he's showing things like the silent trial. Let me pull Constantine back up here. Constantine has a silent trial. The silent trial, it says normal tracks can decrease the target's rage by 10 points. It's not a can, it is a will. They reduce your rage by 10 points, the target's rage by 10 points every turn. So what John Wick has shown us is that these effects get added last. Right, so these rage reduction effects go into play last. It's the same thing for commanders like Amanitore, Nebuchadnezzar, things like that, that those rage reduction effects get added to the equation last. Now, for many cases, this doesn't really matter. So if you gained 150 rage on a turn and you have your opponent has a silent trial, you lose 10 rage, so you get 140. It doesn't matter if it was added first, doesn't matter if it was added last, none of that matters. Where it matters is when there's a rage cap. When there's a rage cap of 220, right, let's say you gained 270 rage in the turn. The way it works, this is what we found out from Wick and crew, is that you first get reduced to that 220, and then that 10 is taken away. That is, you might think I gained 270 rage, so it'll take away 10, which brings me to 260, and then that would be reduced to 220 because I'm over the rage cap. That's the way I think many of us thought it would work, but that is in fact not the case. That is not how it works at all. Instead, what happens is you go over the cap, you go to 270, you're immediately reduced to the cap, you cannot go any higher, and then those negative effects, that minus 10 from silent trial, come into play. So you only gain 210 rage that turn, even though you went way over the cap, even though you earned 270 rage. At the end of it all, you're only going to walk out of there with 210. In other words, this means that you can't counteract those rage reduction effects. That means these rage reduction effects are actually more powerful than rage gain effects, right? So that's a really important insight that we've gained here. And these insights that we learned from John Wick inspired me to do some of my own investigations, to test out a few other things. So 3 things that I wanted to know, and this really had to do with how powerful are these rage reduction effects. It occurred to me because I just said rage reduction seems to be more powerful than rage gain, and there's some people out there who do rage reduction effects. One of those is often forgotten commander, Mulan. Let me pull Mulan up here. I thought, well, maybe Mulan's a lot better than we thought. And in fact, I just saw a video today put out by Legend Ronnie, who's a great content creator, talking about a march that included Mulan. He was talking about what makes Mulan great. And everybody looks at this first skill and they go, wow, look at that. 15% of all 3 stats. That's 45% of stats added to up to 5 marches. It says commander and allies, but we know now that that's 5 marches in a circular area, including your own march. So 4 other marches get those stats. That's really good. With the expertise rage, you get that for 3 seconds instead of 2. It's a really, really good buff. And a lot of people in Season of Conquest have taken Joan of Arc out of their lineup. They've put Trajan in. Trajan is adding that rage gain that they lost when they took Joan of Arc out, but they're putting Mulan in for those stat buffs. And so this is what everybody thinks about with Mulan. This is what she's really great at. But people are forgetting about this second skill. And in fact, I see people talk about the second skill and they're like, oh, damage reduction, that's nice. That rage reduction of 100 is super impressive, actually. And yes, there's only a 20% chance at procs. And yes, there is a 5-second cooldown, and I've already done the simulation on this. It's about 11.5%. About 11.5% of the time, you're going to get this rage reduction. That's basically the equivalent of a silent trial. This is like having a free silent trial. Now, it's a little tricky because it's only when you get attacked, right? So this actually has some interesting implications for Mulan. A lot of people think, well, you just put Mulan behind Constantine. But the problem is Constantine never gets attacked, so you're never really going to see the advantage of that rage reduction. I think one interesting strategy here would be to actually put Mulan, who's got a little bit of tankiness with that rage reduction. She's got a little, this stat boost gives her some tankiness and some attack, of course, as well. But that getting marches to swarm you and you're reducing their rage by 100 is pretty powerful when that happens. So you might want to put something out there that's more likely to be swarmed or targeted. So, and the other thing about Mulan that a lot of people forget is she actually can pair with just about anybody. She really needs to be used as a secondary commander. I think it's her 4th skill here. When she's serving as a secondary commander, she uses the active skill, and whatever she's targeting has to take 10% damage from all sources for 3 seconds. It's actually 20% damage when you have that up to level 5. So it's actually a really good skill that she has as well. So it might be really useful to use Mulan behind commanders that are more likely to be swarmed, which would be kind of interesting. You could put her behind pretty much anybody. You could put her behind Guan. You could put her behind Alex. You could put her behind Saladin. Any commander who you think might be targeted, Mulan actually might work pretty well behind. And so it's an interesting idea. I haven't played around much with it yet, but as we'll see here, I have done some testing with Mulan. And so this is what I really want to know, is just how powerful are these rage reduction effects. And now I'm going to show you some battle reports here. And let's see, I think it is this one right here. So yes, this is the first battle report. There's a couple of things to note here. This is just T1 troops, but we're both out of the alliance, and I don't care about the stats because I don't care about winning and losing. And a lot of John Wick's tests, he's been looking at trying to figure out how rage is working, and it makes sense to make sure your stats are the same and all that kind of stuff. Here, I'm only concerned about these rage reduction effects, this effect that Mulan has. And so I had Mulan with no secondary commander fighting against the Belisarius Baibars. I think it's worth pointing out that my Mulan only has a 4 on the second skill. And so that means she's only reducing rage by 80 instead of the full 100. And all we did is just had them attack each other. And the really interesting thing happens here on turn 6. This is the one worth noting. We see that her Heart of the Warrior skill procced on turn 6, and Belisarius lost 80 rage. Now, what was the impact that actually had on the fight? So this is again before the first skill cycle. So Mulan fires her skill on turn 9. She's getting her skills faster. She's gaining rage faster because she's losing. As you can see in this report, she's losing on every turn. So she's actually getting that rage compensation. So she fires off on turn 9. Notice that Belisarius and Baibars don't fire theirs off until turn 12. Now, this Belisarius build doesn't have any rage gain talent, so it's only getting base rage, and so that's why it's pretty slow to fire off. But again, it also got an 80 rage reduction from Mulan. Now, I want to compare that to a march that doesn't have Mulan, and so that's this one here. This is the same setup, same number of troops, but this time we have a markswoman attacking the Belisarius and Baibars. And so obviously in this case, there's no additional rage reduction that like Mulan offered. And again, the markswoman march is getting all the rage compensation. So Belisarius Baibars are winning the fight. They are getting no rage compensation bonuses. And we see that what happens here is that Belisarius Baibars fire their active skill on turn 11. So that is a 1 turn difference from when they fire their active skill. Now, in a lot of fighting scenarios, that's really important. Delaying your opponent's active skill by 1 turn And of course, this could be true for the entire fight. Obviously, you know, again, there's 20% chance that it procs with a 5-second cooldown, which means it's about 11.5%. But, you know, maybe once every skill cycle. But again, even sometimes on rare occasions, it can even fire twice in a skill cycle, depending on how long the skill cycles are. The point here is you're really actually having an impact with Mulan in terms of slowing down the skill cycle that an opponent is using. And this can have a really dramatic impact if you are, particularly for that first skill cycle, right? So if you've got 2 equally matched marches and you fire your skill cycle second, look, the skill damage that you do, the impact of your skills is based on the number of troops you have. So if your opponent hits you with their skills first, your troop size is going to go down. And I've shown in other videos, and I'll put a card at the top where I talk about some of these battle calculations, is not going to be as effective. Your skill won't be as effective because you've lost more troops. So being delayed by 1 turn is actually a really big deal. Skills like Mulan has, like a Manatore has, like Nebuchadnezzar has, seem really valuable. Actually, Nebu's is really cool because it's not just whoever Nebu is attacking, it's whoever attacks Nebu. I think that's right. I think it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different for Nebu. So the point there is, with Nebu, you can actually think it's just normal attacks. So anybody who attacks him can get that debuff. Or maybe it's the same with Mulan. But anyway, the point here is that that all of them have this really nice rage reduction that can delay your opponent's skill cycle, which can make a big difference in a long battle or even in a short battle, just a really quick 1 skill cycle kind of fight. So commanders like Mulan, Manatore, Nebu might be way stronger than we originally thought, or at least have been thinking for a while. The second thing I wanted to know is there a rage floor, right? So we know there's a rage cap of 220. We know that from Wick, Crew, and some VIP support folks. But is there a rage floor? Is there a minimum amount of rage you will gain each turn no matter what? And so for this, I did a couple of tests. I did a test. These were on barbarians, and there's all kinds of reasons. John Wick is right about this. The barbarian tests are not legitimate, and so you have to take these tests with a grain of salt. But I actually believe these tests are going to work just the same way with troop-to-troop PvP situations. There's a couple of reasons I haven't tested yet. But anyway, I tested this on a barbarian, and I'm going to show the video here in a second. But first, I just want to show you what actually happened. I used Boudica and Mulan, and what I was looking for here was a situation where Boudica's active skill, which, let me pull up the troop buffs, reduces enemies' rage by 100. And of course, Mulan's skill reduces by 80. So I'm looking for turns where those happened at the exact same time. And in this battle against this barbarian, it actually happened on turn 27. So I'm going to jump to turn 27 here and show you that this happened. And so here we can see that Heart of a Warrior was cast, Calvin lost 80 rage, and we can also see that Lament of the Insurgent was cast, and Calvin lost 100 rage. So Calvin lost 180 rage on this turn. Now what's going to be really interesting, you're going to see this in the video, is if you watch the bar closely, on turn 27, and I'll point this out, the Barbarian actually loses rage. That is, on that turn, its rage bar actually goes down. That is, you can earn negative rage on a turn. At least a barbarian can. I suspect it's true for regular troops in the open field as well. With the right combination, there seems to be no rage floor. You can actually get negative rage on a turn. Now, I think there's probably a rage floor at 0. I don't think you can go below 0 rage. So when I say negative rage, I mean negative rage on that turn. I don't think you can get total negative rage. There's a skill on Edward that mentions something like that, that is his total rage can't go below 0. So I don't think you can actually go to 0. But the fact that you can get negative rage on a single turn and actually reduce somebody's rage below what it was the turn prior, I think is pretty cool. I don't really know how much it can go into effect because it's on commanders like Herman and commanders like Boudica, and I don't know how many people are really going to run those commanders, but the fact that these effects exist, I mean, you could try Herman with a Manatore, for example. It might be an interesting one. I think those are both active skills, so I don't think you can get it to line up on the same turn. But there's some really interesting implications, perhaps even for swarming things down. You might want to swarm things with these things that reduce rage, Mulans, Boudica's, Hermans, things like that, that can actually prevent, in some instances, the target from gaining any rage at all in some interesting circumstances. So that's a pretty cool thing there, and I'll show the video right now. All right, so here we're going to be going at 2 times speed because I don't want this to take forever. This video is already long enough as is. You can see we are going through our skill cycle, and right on this one here, we are going to drop that rage backwards. Here it is again in slow-mo, and it's on its way in, and bingo, rage went backwards. And one more time for you here. Bam. Okay, so the third thing I wanted to test was Rejuvenate, and what is the deal with this skill? And let me jump back over here to look at Constantine. If we look at the talents, Rejuvenate gives 150 rage. So we know on a base turn, a typical turn, Constantine is gaining 86 plus 16, which is 102 rage. If he's winning, if he's losing, it'll be 122 because he's going to be getting those compensations if he's losing attack and counterattack. So let's just say he's winning, so he's getting 102 rage. We also know that he's getting 9 from Burning Blood, and we know he's getting another 9 from Undying Fury. That puts Constantine's sort of typical turn rage, assuming he's winning, at 120 rage per turn. And when we add things like Rejuvenate and get another 150, that already puts us over. Right, so 120, honestly, we actually only need 2 points in there. That would put us at exactly 120, even if we're losing. If we're winning, or even if we're winning, if we're losing, we would be going even higher. But that would put us with just 2 points in Rejuvenate. So that actually raises a question about, do you actually need 3 points in Rejuvenate? Is that third point totally wasted? It might be very much wasted on a commander like Constantine, unless, of course, you want to go get Cage of Thorns, which in many cases I do, so I'm okay with that. But we're getting so much rage. We're getting 270 rage with Constantine. One of the things I wanted to know was, is this thing actually working the way it is? There was some video Dragothian released talking about maybe these effects don't work. Maybe if you go over, you don't get any of that rage. And so I went through this really long battle report, and I'm going to pull the battle report up to show you here. And this was by far one of the most confusing battle reports I had to go through. Let's see, I think it's this one here. I've got a Constantine with a Joan of Arc, so there's a lot of things going on there. I also have I'm fighting a Belisarius Mulan, so Mulan is reducing rage, Joan of Arc is buffing rage, Constantine has Rejuvenate. Thankfully, Belisarius didn't have any rage talents to make things even more complicated. And then on top of that, Constantine also had a Silent Trial on, so that's also affecting the rage. And I wanted to see, can I replicate? Can I use these equations to replicate what's actually going on in this battle report? And there is a lot of really interesting things happening here. One of the really important things that happens, and so a couple of things to notice. Notice how close those troop changes are, 32, 34, 31, 32. One of the things that came up as I was going through this was it was really hard for me to tell who was winning and who was losing. Who should be getting that rage compensation on any given turn? And that led me into this really deep dive to understanding that if we look at this report really carefully, we see that Constantine attacked and lost, and Belisarius lost 17. Belisarius counterattacked, Constantine lost 16. So that would make you think that Constantine is winning, that Constantine would not be getting. And again, if we look at the Belisarius attacking the Constantine loses 16, Belisarius loses 17 on the counterattack. So this would make you think, if you looked at this report, you would think, aha, Belisarius lost the attack, Belisarius lost the counterattack. He lost one more troop in both cases, so he should be losing the fight. And that would be exactly wrong. And it took me a lot of effort to figure all of this stuff out. But it turns out, I started thinking, well, wait a minute. It's pretty clear that Constantine is actually getting the rage compensation. That has to do with when the skill fired off. The skill fired off for Constantine on turn 9. It didn't fire off for Belisarius until turn 12. And there was actually a Mulan debuff in there. I forget what turn it was on. I don't know. Somewhere in here, maybe it was like turn 4 or something. Yeah, there it is. There was a Mulan debuff at this time of 60 rage, so Constantine even lost rage, but he still fired off. So it was really clear when I did all of the work on it that Constantine must have been getting the compensation rage for these, even though he was winning the fight, like he was winning the trades. If you look at every single turn here, and I'm not going to go into attack and counterattack, but if you look at every single one of them, Constantine's march was winning. Our side was winning, yet we're getting the rage compensation. So what does that actually mean? Well, so then I started thinking, well, maybe it's the number of troops that we have, because Constantine started with a lot fewer troops. Constantine started with only 500 troops, whereas the Belisarius started with 960 troops. And if you look at a lot of Wick's videos, he doesn't, all of those videos that he's shown so far, all the tests he's shown so far have equal marches. And again, there's a lot of good reasons for that. They want to equate everything to make sure the testing is what they're trying to test. But in real battles, you don't have equal marches. And so maybe, my next thought was maybe it's about the number of troops you have. So because Constantine has fewer troops, he's getting the compensation no matter what, whether he's winning or losing. Turns out that's also wrong. Turns out the answer seems to be the number of troops you lost on your counter, the percentage of troops rather. So if we start here on turn 1, I have 500 troops and I lost 16. So I take 16 out of 500. That's the percentage of troops I lost. Belisarius lost 17 out of 960. That's the percentage of troops he lost. And so you look at that percentage of troops on the attack, and if your percentage was higher, if you lost a higher percentage of your march, you get the rage compensation. And that's also true for the counterattack turn as well. And so that seems to be how the rage compensation is working. And the reason I know that is because later on in the battle, particularly after turn 13, notice here that we gained 185 troops. That's because Constantine used his skill here. Where is that skill? There it is, Constantine, the Cross of the Divine, restoring 202 troops. And from this point onward, and it may have even been earlier, notice that the troop march sizes are getting closer and closer. And how many Belisarius is losing? Belisarius is losing 28. We're losing 18. The percentage of troops lost at the start of that turn starts to flip, right? So here on turn 14, we lose... well, it should be 9 and 9. Yes, 9 and 9, and Belisarius loses 14 and 14. And again, if you start doing the math on these percentages, and as you go on in the report, the percentage of troops lost flips. And so it's actually Belisarius who starts getting the rage boost as well. The other thing I confirmed in looking through all of this is that Rejuvenate does in fact work. If you go over the 220 cap, you get reduced to 220, just like John Wick and others showed. So I'm going to pull up here a spreadsheet walking through the details of that report and explaining why that's really important and how we can understand what we mean by percentage of the troops we're losing and how that impacts. So here we are in this spreadsheet that I built, and this builds out every single turn what happened in that battle that I just talked to you about, just the battle report that I just showed you. So there's 35 total turns, as we can see here. This is the total number of troops I started with. This is the Constantine Joan march. This tells me how many total troops we lost that turn. This is how many we lost on the attack. This is how many we lost on the counterattack. This is how many troops we had at the end of the turn. You'll notice that these don't always work out, because on turns when Belisarius used a skill, did skill damage, then you don't see that here. I haven't listed the skill damage here. These are really important columns. These are the, well, actually, these two end up not mattering. At first, I thought they did. This is the percentage of troops I lost that turn. That's coming from this column. This is the percentage of troops I've lost total out of the 500. That ends up not mattering either. This is how much rage I think I've gained, or I should have gained based on some stuff I'm going to show you in a minute. So I gained 96 rage from attack, I gained 26 from counterattack, and I gained 18 from my talents. That's burning blood and the other infantry tree talent as well. So that should give me 140 per turn. I did the checks on this. This column is report. So this tells me exactly how much rage I gain each turn. And I marked right here where the skill proc, where it said Constantine is about to cast Edict of Milan. And then the next turn, it fired off. And again, we start getting rage, we get rejuvenate, we get all of these rage points here, and that puts us over 220. So we only get 220 on that turn. I checked all of this out. All of these line up with when we proc. That includes the Joan rage buffs. That includes the Mulan debuffs. We can see that she debuffed us multiple times. I don't know why that says 50 when it should say 60, but it doesn't really matter. In any case, all of this, all of this stuff here worked out just fine. Everything procced when we thought it would proc, and I'll show exactly how that all worked out here in a second. So that's this march. The other march I also did the same thing for. This is the Belisarius march. It started with 960 troops, how many troops they lost, all of these kinds of things, how much they got, rage they got on attack, counterattack. They had no talents gaining rage. It lost 10 rage every turn for silent trial. I checked again in the reports. It fired on turn 11. It fired on turn 21. And this is how I know, for example, that the Constantine march was actually getting the rage compensation. It was getting the 96 and the Belisarius was getting the 86, even though, again, the Belisarius was losing losing 17 and we were only losing 16. Again, you might intuitively think because we were losing less, the rage buff should go here, but in fact, the compensation is actually going to our march, and I'm going to show you why here in a second. So in total, this all works out. All of those rages work out. Again, all of these work out as well. The total rage that we get, when it procced, when it fired, I checked all of that with a report. So again, for 32, 35, whatever turns, we know all of that worked. And so the way I had to work out how this rage buff worked is really, you can see in these charts here. So now I've taken what's in this Constantine chart, I've taken what's in this Belisarius chart, and I've put them here side by side. So we can see how much we lost attack, how much we lost on the counterattack, how many troops we had at the end of that turn, and then what percentage we lost. Where is this at? Yes, so it's right. That's over here. This is the percentage we lost on attack. That's over here in yellow. Percentage we lost on the counter attack, and that's where things get really important. Is it's on these two right here. Same thing for Belisarius, what percentage it lost from the attack. That's the 17 out of the 960 that started with will give you this percentage. And again, 17 here out of the 960 you started with will give you this percentage. So as we can see, the Constantine Joan actually lost a higher percentage of its march to start that turn at 500. It lost a higher percentage on turn 1. And so that's why up here we see that the Constantine Joan got both the attack and the counterattack rage compensations. Now, if we go to turn 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through these turns, or what is this? I think turn 10, we see the same thing, that it's, even though it's getting closer each time, the Constantine Joan is actually losing a higher percentage of its troops on attack and counterattack each time. Now, it gets interesting on turn 11 and turn 12. Here's, I believe, because Constantine has procced his skill, right? Constantine fired on skill 9. So Constantine's damage reduction is going, and also it's gaining ground, right? As we can see from, right? So here we're only losing 9 troops, and Belisarius is losing 9 and 23, or 14 and 23 from attacks and counterattacks respectively. So on these turns, and actually, I guess it's these two turns right here is where we really see things shift. We actually see that for the first time, these rage buffs should be shifting. And in fact, only when I set it up this way, only when the report matches like this, do we see these procs, these fires, do we see those actually line up correctly, is when this is going on. So when the Belisarius, in this case, it would be, since this is line 11, we're seeing that Belisarius lost 23 troops out of 648 right there. And so that's this 3.5%. That's what we should see. And it's only there at that point that it starts getting the rage compensation. So it gets the rage compensation on attack and counter attack. That's an extra 20 rage here, an extra 20 rage here, but then it loses it here. Again, I think this is because Belisarius fires off his skill. So if we go to Belisarius, we see that Belisarius fired on turn 12, and Belisarius' effects actually takes a turn to kick in. So we actually see that we're losing.
taking more damage here. It's really interesting because this is also the same turn that Constantine fired off, and this is what was very confusing for me. This is actually the same turn that Constantine fired his heal, his big heal. It ends up that has no effect. That didn't matter at all. What mattered was that Belisarius' skill was doing some more damage to us. So ultimately, what that meant was we had fewer troops, and also Belisarius was tankier that turn. We were taking more damage because of Belisarius' skill that procs when you're below 50%. So the Constantine Joan was actually taking more damage that turn. So the Constantine Joan, as a percentage of its total march, again, this got really low that turn. So extra defensiveness going on. Some of the skills wore off. So Belisarius and Mulan. Actually, I think this may also be around when Mulan starts buffing as well. And so what happens is the rage buff goes back to Constantine Joan that turn. And then again, it flips again the next turn. The Belisarius, Mulan's getting it. And then it goes back to the Constantine Joan. And then finally, to end the battle, as the Constantine Joan has caught up to the Belisarius Mulan, we see that now for the rest of the battle, the Belisarius Mulan gets that rage buff. So that's what's going on. And that's why I think some of this is so confusing to see in battle reports, is because it actually can flip, and it can even flip on attack and counterattack. You can actually have turns where you take a bigger loss on attack, but your opponent takes the bigger loss on counterattack. And so you would get the rage compensation on the attack, and they would get the rage compensation on the counterattack. So I hope all of this makes sense. It was a tremendous amount of work for me to go through all of this. And I know this isn't a really clean, neat spreadsheet, but at the end of the day, it shows that, in fact, this is how rage is working. That's what John Wick is telling you in his videos is working. Just as he says. And I think the real interesting insight here is that how do we know if we're winning or losing? We know we are winning or losing based on the percentage of troops that we lost to the attack and the counterattack, skill damage set aside, skill set aside. How many troops did we lose on the attack? What percentage of our march did we lose on the attack compared to our opponent? What percentage of the march did we lose on the counterattack compared to our opponent? Whoever loses those, whoever has a higher percentage of troops lost, will get those rage buffs or those rage compensations.
All right, guys, and that's it for this video. Look, if you learned something about rage, if you got some new insights into your commanders, don't forget to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and press that notification bell so that you are alerted every time I release a new video. Thanks, everybody, for coming by, and we'll talk to you soon.